It's an honor to join you tonight. As Tim mentioned, I've been asked to speak about the phenomenon of Zohran Mamdani, the socialist comrade who is currently leading the pack in the race for mayor of New York City. My short answer is that his election may be likely, but it's not a given. And if he's elected, he will do significant damage in New York City, but will not lead a national trend towards socialism. Just a prediction. Early voting begins in 9 days, and right now, back in New York, they're about 1 hour into the first debate featuring Mamdani, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who lost to Mamdani in the Democratic primary and is now running as an independent, and the Republican Curtis Sliwa. You may recall he founded the Guardian Angels crime-fighting organization in the 1970s and has since had a long career as a talk radio host. Sliwa was also the GOP nominee in 2021. Now, here in 2025, if people living at the center of the world's capital markets choose to elect a socialist mayor, then I really can think of only one obvious conclusion. A great many New Yorkers are in desperate need of a Hillsdale education. Hillsdale students no doubt learn that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Mamdani, on the other hand, is promising free city buses, and he says they will be faster than the ones you pay for. Amazing. It's a technological marvel. He also promises free childcare. Also, he will open city-owned grocery stores in every borough of the city to sell food at low prices. His new program, at least the ones he's announced so far, his new programs will cost taxpayers more than the total budget of the New York City Police Department, which he now claims he no longer wants to defund. By the way, yesterday he sort of apologized for his earlier remarks, calling police officers racist, corrupt, anti-queer, and a major threat to public safety. He apologizes now to the officers, but still seems to suggest that the system is unjust. A structural racism, apparently, in policing. Mamdani is also promising a near doubling of the city's minimum wage to $30 per hour by the year 2030, and a rent freeze for rent-controlled apartments that together house more than 2 million New Yorkers. He says he wants $10 billion in new annual city revenue to pay for his plans. He also wants to borrow another $70 billion to build more affordable housing over the next decade. In addition, he wants to borrow funds to renovate schools, to install renewable energy infrastructure. He also wants to shut down gifted and talented programs. Taken together, these two policies describe an educational agenda focused on pointlessly expensive mediocrity. Now, where will Mamdani get the money to pay for all his new programs? His campaign's rhetoric about shifting the tax burden to quote-unquote richer and whiter neighborhoods is nasty, and the initial details are pretty ugly too. Mamdani is calling for an increase of more than 50% in the city's top individual income tax rate to 6%. That would be up from the current 3.9%. Nicole Jelena of the Manhattan Institute points out that if enacted, New York's combined city and state top individual income tax would approach 17%, zooming right past California's eye-watering level of 13%. But most of the new money that Mamdani aims to extract from New York's economy will come from an increase he will ask the state government in Albany to enact in the state corporate income tax. He says that pushing the state's 7.5% corporate rate up to 11.5% will simply match neighboring New Jersey, which currently levies the highest corporate rate in the country. But New York's rate will actually be much higher because New Jersey towns don't collect corporate taxes like New York City does. The combined state and local corporate tax rate in New York City will rise to a staggering 22%. much higher than New Jersey, and I believe nearly 10 times the rate here in Charlotte. Now, no doubt, econ students at Hillsdale learn that incentives matter. If Mamdani succeeds, they are in for some fascinating examples as they observe the next wave of businesses migrating to the South and West. And I almost forgot, there's another item that Mamdani wants to make free. He wants society to be free of billionaires. I think we can all agree that his plan will go a long way to creating that situation in New York. Both billionaires and aspiring billionaires will have good reason to flee New York. And if Mamdani gets his wish, the city and the state will have an existential budget crisis. In New York's highly progressive tax system, the top 1% of taxpayers already pay roughly 40% of the city's individual income taxes, and the percentage is even higher for state income taxes. But as the investors and jobs depart, Mamdani does have a plan for attracting new residents. He has announced plans to make New York a sanctuary city for gender-affirming care. Mamdani's refusal to condemn the phrase globalize the intifada is also bound to attract some new residents to the city. And it's scary to think that they too may receive affirmation. By the way, I should note for what it's worth that Andrew Cuomo thinks the explosion of support among 20-somethings for Mamdani in the Democratic primary was not because of his socialist economics, but because of Gaza, which raises the hope that if the peace deal holds, perhaps some of them will be less motivated to turn out next month. But for now, Mamdani still leads. Considering the economic idiocy of the Mamdani agenda, one may be tempted to laugh or cry, depending on whether you live in Charlotte or Manhattan. For us tearful Northeasterners, his platform looks like one long, dreary menu of overbearing government and senseless commercial destruction. But before we get too depressed looking at this buffet of scarcity, let's consider the recent polling in the race. Because the public hasn't fallen for Mamdani nearly as hard as my colleagues in the media industry have. Yes, he shows consistent double-digit leads, but in a number of recent surveys, combining the Cuomo and Sliwa support adds up to a little more than Mamdani's level of support. Mamdani has basically been frozen just below 50% in most polls for several months now. This is one of the reasons the Mamdani phenomenon is perhaps a bit of a fluke, a sort of political accident, though I have to acknowledge that New York City has had a lot of them lately. And of course, accidents can be very destructive. Still, the Mamdani phenomenon in New York City doesn't look like the start of a broader trend toward leftist politics. In national polling, socialism doesn't seem to be enjoying a sudden surge. Gallup finds no change on that score since 2019. Nationwide, and even in liberal New Jersey, right next door, many Democratic candidates are now doing their level best to sound like conservatives who oppose tax and spending hikes and prioritize law and order. While there is still an active debate among elected Democrats on whether they want to govern like socialists, there is at least an emerging consensus that they don't want to sound like socialists. In New York City, notwithstanding Mamdani's considerable media skills, he's had the great fortune of facing competitors who have been significantly damaged by scandal. Current Mayor Eric Adams, who recently quit the race, was indicted on corruption charges a year ago and received more negative attention when the charges were dropped this year in what some saw as an inappropriate deal by the Trump administration to support its migrant policy. Cuomo, for his part, resigned the governorship 4 years ago rather than answer sexual harassment allegations, and he had also imposed on the citizenry an appalling series of COVID-era abuses. Mamdani still benefits from a three-way race, as Cuomo and Sliwa have each refused to drop out, and at least as of last week, according to Cuomo, he and Sliwa have not had any discussions about it. But what makes a tragic accident like a Mamdani mayoralty possible is that even though socialism's 39% support in the Gallup poll hasn't improved since 2019, it's a shockingly and disgracefully high number given the horrors that ideology has unleashed over the last bloody century. All of us who appreciate the virtues of liberty have a lot of work to do. In New York, we have a particular challenge because while Mamdani is a socialist, he's basically running a campaign against the failures of socialist policies, many of them enacted by Cuomo as governor. Mamdani talks about affordability, but doesn't acknowledge why the city is so hard to afford. One of our recent editorials laid out the case. Start with sky-high rents. In 2019, then Governor Cuomo signed a law restricting landlords' ability to raise rents to pay for renovations in rent-controlled apartments. Landlords responded by removing tens of thousands of units from the market. Cuomo also imposed a long COVID eviction moratorium. This caused landlords to raise rents where they could to compensate for non-paying tenants. Property taxes have risen as Cuomo's property tax cap exempted New York City. His COVID lockdowns and tax hikes fueled the flight of high earners and businesses. New York City's population declined by some 320,000 between 2020 and 2024, despite an influx of foreign migrants. A lot of business people who might have voted against Mamdani now live in Miami. Now we can make the same case on the Cuomo impact on energy and labor costs as well. And now along comes Mamdani proposing that the solution is more socialism. Freeze the rent has become one of his signature slogans. And if government rent freezes were the solution to housing availability, then New York City would have long ago created housing abundance. Many people date the city's rent control programs to 1943, but the city also had a version of rent control as early as the 1920s. This suggests a better slogan. Vote Mamdani, because a century of failure is not enough. This talk of affordability, it's a theme that offers a way of running as well against the inflation created by overactive government in Washington. Beyond Mamdani, you see even moderate Democrats nationwide running on this issue as they pose in opposition to the results of their party's policies. Speaking of moderate Democrats, you might be wondering why one of them, surely at least one of them was untainted by scandal, couldn't have challenged Mamdani in the Democratic primary this year. Unfortunately, while moderate Democrats do exist, they are generally not an observable phenomenon in New York City. So how bad will it get in New York if Mamdani wins? Most of his tax and spending plans would have to be approved by the state legislature and the governor, but Governor Kathy Hochul has endorsed him, and Albany is not exactly the land of libertarians, so they'll probably give him a lot of what he wants. A reasonable expectation is that if elected, he'll cling bitterly to his ideology and will not be deterred by its inevitable failures. For the last nearly 5 years in the New York State Assembly, he's essentially been Albany's AOC, rejecting moderation and compromise, polishing his social media skills to badger colleagues to move leftward, and issuing veiled threats to replace them if they won't. Mamdani has achieved nothing of note except perhaps to intimidate some Albany Democrats in the same way that AOC intimidates Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in Washington. Certainly there is a hope among many New Yorkers that Mamdani is simply inexperienced, naive, and ignorant, and will grow in office, that he will learn valuable lessons in practicality as his intellectual fascinations collide with reality. This hope was captured in a New York Times article this week that said he's been reaching out to prominent business people for private meetings. Quote, a surprising thing has been happening when Mr. Mamdani gets behind closed doors with New York's elite. They are finding themselves unexpectedly charmed. It's partly because of what Mr. Mamdani, the well-educated and well-mannered son of Manhattan intellectuals, does. He listens, asks questions, and is amiable. But it's also what he doesn't do. He doesn't lecture the business leaders, instead absorbing their points of view and at times promising to think about their arguments, unquote. There's a lot of reason to be skeptical, but for those hoping to defeat him, it's a good sign, just like his sort of apology to the police that he's still not comfortable with his current level of support and is trying to build his coalition. Let's all hope that he does think about arguments that challenge his ideology. If he does not, we have to hope that the commercial culture that built New York City is durable enough to withstand him. One of our great Hillsdale graduates of the Wall Street Journal, Nicole Alt, wrote recently, quote, "For all its progressivism, New York is essentially American, thrumming with business, ingenuity, and ambition, hustlers after big dreams and money. It entertains socialism, but its impulse is capitalist, believing in work and opportunity. That impulse has curbed the worst excesses of insensible governance. Mr. Mamdani's victory in November isn't guaranteed, but even if he becomes mayor, socialism won't be the final word in New York," unquote. I think we're going to need this spirit because Mamdani has turned down a lot of obvious opportunities to learn about the failures of central planning. The platform of the Mamdani campaign expresses a constant assault on the free economy, but I'd like to focus on one proposal in particular, a network of city-owned grocery stores that he says will be focused on keeping prices low, not making a profit. He says that without having to pay rent or property taxes, they will reduce overhead and pass on savings to shoppers, buy and sell at wholesale prices, centralize warehousing and distribution, and partner with local neighborhoods on products and sourcing. How's that going to work out? Reader Thomas Angelo recently wrote to us, quote, "If the voters want to let New York run the grocery stores, they shouldn't forget that the city also ran Off-Track Betting Corp. Into bankruptcy. New York couldn't even run a gambling operation with the odds stacked in its favor," unquote. The fact that Mr. Mamdani is focused on government-run grocery stores in particular is one reason I think we're going to need more than laughter to counter him. One could say he has simply crafted an obvious message to reach consumers who are in search of low prices after years of elevated inflation. But then why not just lead a campaign to convince his fellow politicians to finally welcome Walmart into the city? Call it ignorance or stubbornness, on his part, but around the world and across time, grocery stores have been consistently among the most obvious visible demonstrations of the failures of socialism and the benefits of capitalism. Does he not know this? In 2003, the self-described democratic socialists who run Venezuela opened the first of their new government-run grocery stores, hailed them as a way to make groceries affordable in poor neighborhoods. 4 years later, Simon Romero reported, yes, in the New York Times from Caracas, quote, "Faced with an accelerating inflation rate and shortages of basic foods like beef, chicken, and milk, President Hugo Chavez has threatened to jail grocery store owners and nationalize their businesses if they violate the country's expanding price controls." 2 years later, the Los Angeles Times reported, quote, "Although price controls are designed to help the poor, it is low-income families that suffer through scarcities and long lines at the government-owned Mercal grocery chain, where half of all Venezuelan groceries are sold. Industry officials have complained that price controls contribute to inflation, which now exceeds 30% a year," unquote. Now, we could take comfort in the fact that the mayor of New York City can't control our country's agricultural economy, and therefore the potential damage is limited. But there is still plenty of failure to be seen in US experimentation with city-run grocery stores. Recently, for example, in Erie, Kansas and Baldwin, Florida. As for New York City, in the unlikely event that Mamdani marts really do win over shoppers with an abundant selection of quality food at low prices, they will drive hardworking bodega owners out of business and reduce the tax revenue needed to fund city services. More likely, they will operate with all the inefficiency and graft of the typical state-owned enterprise. After Mamdani's victory in the Democratic primary this summer, we received a letter from a reader named David Arnold, who I guess you could say expressed a sort of optimism. Quote, "Zohran Mamdani may be the next mayor of New York by doubling down on the socialist promises of free stuff and taxing the rich, none of which has ever worked. Yet one proposal, making shopping cheaper with government-run grocery stores, may succeed. I have been in Cuban government grocery stores, and you do save money. Unfortunately, it's because the shelves are empty, unquote. Now, in fairness to Mr. Mamdani, he says he's not a communist. He clarifies that he's a democratic socialist. It's also fair to note that when you read about Cuba on the website of the Democratic Socialists of America, the United States is blamed for the appalling conditions on the island, while the murderous communist dictatorship is gently critiqued as a government that, quote, has its shortcomings, unquote. We also learn from the Democratic Socialists that Cuba is far from perfect. There's also a page on the Democratic Socialist website called What is Democratic Socialism? It says that capitalism is a system designed by the owning class to exploit the rest of us for their own profit. It adds, we want to collectively own the key economic drivers that dominate our lives, such as energy production and transportation. But of course, the Mamdani plan goes well beyond free bus rides. Why would anyone want socialism at the grocery store? For many immigrants to this country, the first visit to a US supermarket is an unforgettable moment of wonder. Many of you have no doubt enjoyed watching US gymnast Suni Lee win gold medals in the Olympics. Some years ago, ESPN described her mother's 1980s arrival in the United States after escaping collectivism in Southeast Asia. She arrived as a child in St. Paul, Minnesota. She recalled, quote, we went to a grocery store and I thought it was magic. Vanilla ice cream in a box, Starburst, unquote. 25 years ago, 60 Minutes was doing a story on Boris Yeltsin and the fall of the Soviet Union. Leon Aaron, who had written a biography of Yeltsin, described the Russians' visit to a supermarket in Houston. Aaron said, quote, if there was an epiphany in Yeltsin's life, I think that is probably it. The cornucopia, the lemons of this color, and the shining red peppers of that color, and the little sprinkled water on everything. Everything is glistening. They started counting the number of produce on the shelves. He was literally shaken by the quality of goods. He was in shock. He gets on the plane, and Yeltsin, for almost the entire flight, sat with his head in his hands. And when he finally came to, he said, look what they've done to our poor people. In other words, he saw what regular, ordinary Americans have compared to even elite Soviets, unquote. Of course, even before Yeltsin's eye-opening visit to the United States, in his country, there was a long tradition of trying to laugh through the tears of government-run food distribution. In Russia, back in the Soviet era, they used to talk about a man who walks into a shop and says to the clerk behind the counter, you don't have any meat? The clerk says, no, here we don't have any fish. The shop that doesn't have any meat is across the street. Of course, the deprivation extended everywhere throughout the captive nations of the Soviet Empire. Christopher McDaniel wrote in the Journal in 1986, quote, for several years now, observers have said that virtually no one behind the Iron Curtain takes socialism seriously anymore. There will always be a few true believers, sad cases for students of pathology, but among politicians, the ideals of Marxism-Leninism are simply exploited as a matter of form, and among the general population, socialism is just a bad joke, unquote. Now, of course, one had to be very careful about where to tell jokes and to whom, so they circulated quietly underground. There was the story of a communist functionary in East Germany who stood before a crowd and announced, comrades, after this 5-year plan, every citizen will have a motorcycle. After the next one, a car, and after the next one, an airplane. But why would we need airplanes? Someone in the crowd asked. Stupid question, responded the official. Just think, you live in Rostock and you hear that toilet paper is available in Eisenach. You simply hop in your airplane, fly to Eisenach, and 2 hours later you're home again without having to stand in line. The shortages could confuse relations as well. A woman went to a garage and asked to have her car fixed. "Of course," said the mechanic, "but only if you give me a night in return." The woman reluctantly agreed, to which the mechanic responded, "Okay, get in line down at the grocery store. They've got onions. I'll relieve you in the morning." Now, wouldn't someone planning to open a network of government-run stores want to learn something about the history of government-run stores, and then, having learned of the history, want to go in another direction? We have millions of immigrants in the city of New York, and no doubt many of them know how little they want to go back to shopping at a government-run grocery store. This may be one of the reasons why, after all the slick online videos and all the media adulation and all of Cuomo's political baggage, it still looks like Mamdani needs the campaign to remain a three-man race to win. There's also a factor in Mamdani's favor, and that is that he is arriving at a moment when crime has been trending down. Eric Adams, a former cop, was elected in 2021 after the riots of 2020 and Cuomo's ill-advised changes to bail laws and Mayor Bill de Blasio's progressive hostility toward various aspects of policing. There was a sense that the city was sliding back toward its violent past. While still far below the levels of the early 1990s, murders in the city rose in 2020 and 2021. Today, Mamdani is surely benefiting from the decline since then. For all his faults, Adams has maintained sanity and competence at the top of the police department. The Mamdani phenomenon may simply be that the left-wing Democrats, who have long constituted most of the New York City electorate, don't think that crime is bad enough for them to become single-issue law and order voters again. Public safety may need to get worse before voters demand that it gets better. A lot of New Yorkers didn't vote for Rudy Giuliani in the 1990s and Michael Bloomberg in the 2000s because they wanted them, but because they needed them. Giuliani was the answer when the city was suffering roughly 2,000 murders a year. Last year, there were fewer than 400. Bloomberg was first elected just a few weeks after 9/11. Foiling the next plot, and there were many of them over the years, was job one. Today, the city's current police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, I'm proud to say, is a former intern at the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. Her main challenge these days is overcoming the damage from the state's so-called reforms of criminal justice that took effect in 2020. They eliminated cash bail for misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, among other changes, and created a phenomenon of skyrocketing recidivism. But even with this headwind, violent crime is trending down. If Mamdani wins, it may be because the police officers he has condemned have allowed New Yorkers to take public safety for granted. If he is open to listening and learning about anything, perhaps he'll come to understand the value of safe streets. I think I'll end on that almost hopeful note and just add one more, that the race is not over yet. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. We now have time for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you.
Wouldn't it be to the advantage of Republicans for Mamdani to win and turn New York into a dystopian smoking hole as an example of what happens to socialism?
Well, I think I could appreciate that point of view more if I didn't live in the New York area. But this has definitely been a topic of conversation. Are New Yorkers going to take one for the team in order for next year's elections to be a referendum on Mamdaniism. A few things. Thinking about maybe why we don't want New York to go down the tubes. Obviously, not just the world's financial capital, and obviously socialism is a humanitarian abomination. Also, New York City consumes a lot of federal assistance, and that number is not going to shrink if the Mamdani program is enacted there. Oh, okay, maybe it will. I think this is one question that people have, and I know Cuomo has wondered about our president. Does Trump want Mamdani or not want Mamdani? It's sort of Trump's love for the city of New York, perhaps competing against his desire for political advantage next year. Hypothetically, we don't know how the president looks at it, but I think it's a big price to pay. But the reason I was talking about it, maybe this is wishful thinking. I kind of see Mamdani as a fluke, is that so much of the momentum is really in the other direction. This is kind of an odd outlier, maybe a hangover from the era of wokeness, when you've seen a lot of cities really rethinking their descents into kind of progressive insanity and moving back the other direction. It would help for Cuomo or Sliwa to get out of the race.
Yes, 150,000 are enrolled in charter schools in New York City. Why does he want to get rid of them?
Yeah. Why does socialism eventually always turn toward tyranny? This drive to punish success and achievement. I don't have a good answer for what the deep-seated motivation is. Okay, that's a better answer.
Mamdani is a anti-Semite, pro-Hamas. How is the Jewish population of New York reacting?
I would say to this point, maybe not as harshly as you would kind of expect, but maybe it's getting there. I don't know, maybe it's sort of a tradition where a lot of communities, they want to welcome in candidates and hear them out, but I think he's got a pretty solid, pretty extensive record of showing his opposition to Israel. So I'm not sure, not wanting to globalize the Intifada. That seems like kind of a layup, whatever your politics. Maybe that's coming. I think. Again, this is Cuomo's view, is that that's been building lately and that it's rising.
I'd like to know who his support, what people are more in favor of Mamdani. Or is it the media type? Is it the, who's supporting him?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it's a little hard to discern because the message is almost entirely about affordability. But again, Cuomo's opinion is that the big surge is from young people angry about Gaza. I think if we're going to see is that if that peace deal holds, maybe that's a issue hurting Mamdani's turnout as we get closer to Election Day. But in terms of what is he running on, what are people responding to, everything he's talking about is affordability. And I think, and you're seeing this in races around the country, it's an acute issue in New York, as I was discussing, in part because Mamdani-friendly policies have made it very expensive to live there, to build there, to work there. But he is able to, I guess, persuade some group of voters, mainly younger voters, that the answer is more government instead of less. But again, just looking at the historical perspective, this is always a very left-wing electorate. So I think, and I remember when AOC first came into office, there was a desire, especially among a lot of people in my industry, to see her rise as signaling some larger movement, a bellwether, a change in the country's mood. I don't think the New York City electorate is a bellwether for the country.
Could you comment on Mamdani's connection to foreign Islamic extremists?
I can't. I haven't studied that, so I can't.
How do you explain the recent upsurge in office rentals in New York City, considering what the polls are indicating?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting news this week as well. I got some mail about that. People saying, "Well, it's just a lease. It's not building new buildings." Obviously, the markets have been good. Economy's doing pretty well, better than a lot of people thought. You've had pretty much all the big financial houses telling people they have to come back to work 5 days a week over the last few years. So I think there are a lot of reasons having nothing to do with Mamdani, but the root of your question, is it business people who aren't as scared as they should be? Or, maybe, I guess, to open the possibility, maybe he's not as effective as he would like to be if he is elected. Maybe they're making a bet that he's young and inexperienced and can't actually get much done. I think he's more energetic than Bill de Blasio, though, so I don't think counting on laziness and incompetence is a good strategy for an investor. It could be that they're looking at the polls I was describing and they're saying he still hasn't really made the sale. Cuomo or Sliwa gets out and he could easily lose.
It's always been said that if you want to know what's going on, follow the money. My question would be, based on a report that I heard recently, that his campaign is financed by the royal family of Qatar, the country of Oman, and the UAE. Could you comment on that?
I'm sorry, I really don't know. I haven't studied that aspect of it.
Rasmussen polls are credible. Recently, Rasmussen reported that 53% of voters under the age of 40 favor socialism. What can people in this room do about that trend?
I mean, I do think you're in the right room. A lot of it does come back to education. I was polling some young people this week, and I think there are mentions of Marx and what he argued in school. There may even be mentions of the Gulag, but I don't think there is a thorough education about the not just the extent of the horrors. I'm not sure I don't know if there's a poll of how many teenagers in the U.S. have heard of the Great Leap Forward or understand what it was. And I don't know if the day-to-day failures of socialism have been are adequately being shared with younger people, beyond the horrible, murderous treatment of dissidents. Just the daily failure of the empty supermarket shelf. I don't think that is something that is widely known by a teenager, that socialism equals empty shelves. And maybe this is an opportunity with him rising in prominence to maybe have a positive experiment if he actually does have a meaningful success in driving billionaires out of that city and driving small business people over the Hudson River.
If Mamdani does win in New York, how does that not create a contagion cascading down through the midterm 26 for them to they took the big apple and just have that be a snowball into more? And really, one more after New York is all they need, and then one more after that. How is that not going to happen?
Well, so I guess maybe it's a timing question. We know over a longer time horizon our ideas work and theirs don't. So his policies will fail. People will not hang around. Now, you're saying in the short time horizon, before the failure is manifest, before New York City suddenly isn't able to tax its former residents who are now living here, you know, are they able to have a honeymoon? If he's that persuasive and compelling, I think he actually ought to be polling better there. That's my view. I don't, and you know, maybe my experience is colored by living in New Jersey. It's all the other way. It's Democrats trying to sound like Republicans. I really think the intellectual arguments have kind of been won by people, at least in my neck of the woods, won by people saying taxes have to be restrained, government money, taxpayer money has to be spent wisely. There's now a big backlash about taxpayer-subsidized developments. It's often presented as an affordable housing play. It's a kind of a deal with where developers do well and politicians get political goals met, and it costs a lot of money and changes communities in ways residents don't necessarily like. This is getting a big backlash. So the sort of central planning vibe is really in retreat in New Jersey, even if I don't know, there's not an election prediction because, like I said, the messages have been crafted to this, what it seems like a new sensibility. So Democrats may end up winning, Republicans may win, I'm not sure, but the sort of full-on primal scream of Marxism that Mamdani is bringing seems to me very out of step with other recent political trends. Thank goodness.
Thank you. So when I look at the history of this guy, and I look at all the advantages that he has a great deal of advantage at this moment. Look at his background, Asian, African, speaking to a generation that are really not studying, because you don't need an economic degree to know that his economic ideologies will be a failure But that ideology is placed a lot to the younger people. They believe it. Even when you teach in the class, you see some kids believe that, oh, this ideology of cheap things there, free things over there can work, even though it has proved over and over again that it doesn't work. So this guy has a lot of advantages. In your own opinion, how can we sort of dissect all these various advantages to be able to counter that? Because I'm from Canada, and I just remember 10 years or 11 years ago when we had Trudeau, we had the similar features in him. He was promising heaven and earth. He was speaking to younger people. He was giving an economic situation that was not real. But most people bought into it, and he ended up being the prime minister for almost 10 years and ruined our economy very badly. I think I see that coming, unless we come up with strategies that can actually target his various advantages and try to minimize that. It might repeat itself right there in New York. What do you think? Can we look at the various advantages he has and find a way how conservatives can pick on them and try to weaken that? Because I think what is going to happen if he runs New York for, say, 8 years, there's no way we are going to separate New York from the rest of the United States. We're going to have the impact very significantly. Thank you.
You're talking about his background, and this is one issue where it does make you wonder about the state of education, because all along the way he has gone to what you would call elite schools, very selective institutions, and you do kind of wonder, how does someone go through the sort of blue chip, at least in terms of kind of credentials or reputation of the educational system, and not learn that socialism doesn't work? How do you kind of avoid the history of the last century somehow and be a credentialed, educated person? That's an educational failure. But I'm not sure if I understand your question, but I don't think attacking him as young and inexperienced and not having achieved anything is necessarily going to be persuasive. I think it really has to be just attacking his bad ideas. And there are a lot of them. And he's also expressed them in a very nasty way. This sort of his fumbling attempt now to try and walk back his outrageous comments about the police, saying to someone, all those horrible things I said about you, I didn't really mean it about you. I just mean the job you're doing. What is it? You're still kind of saying the same thing to that person. So I think there's a lot of material there, not just in his rhetoric, but in his policy proposals that should, I guess it's happening right now. If Cuomo and Sliwa are able to make the case, I think can be very persuasive.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Freeman.
Thank you.